Keira.
Good morning to our witnesses, or good afternoon. I'm not sure what time zones that you're in, but you're very welcome. I want to start off by saying I'm looking at Bonnie's opening statement, and I want to say, Bonnie, firstly, I 100% agree that we shouldn't allow machines to determine who lives or dies, and I fully agree with the fact that machines can't understand the true value of a human life because they're not themselves living beings. So I just want to start with the caveat that I agree with all of that, but as a behavioural psychologist, I want to kind of play devil's advocate and bring a totally different perspective just to upset the conversation, looking at what we've seen humans do across the ages in, I suppose, psychological tests, but also when we look back on genocides and holocausts, and even if you look back on reports from Vietnam, and we have seen that human judgment can be completely biased, fallible, and in many ways have catastrophic effects. So I'm wondering, is there an upside or any positive hope if we build in safety by design that actually autonomous AI weapons, if they were taught to obey international law, would in some cases be, better than human judgment? And I know this is a very devil's advocate kind of question, but I just think we've seen, history has shown us that humans will follow orders in some desperate circumstances. So I know it's a very out there question, but why not?
Sure. It's not an out there question. I think it's a very valid question. A couple responses. One is two responses. One is on the flip side of it's true that autonomous weapon systems would lack emotion, and therefore they would lack the anger and I want to say evil, but the things that drive people to commit genocide or act in anger and kill people unnecessarily. At the same time, they would lack the compassion that humans also possess, that some humans possess at least, and studies have shown that they possess in many cases that have served as a check on killing. So I always feel like the lack of emotion sort of can counterbalance each other. And then in terms of if they are taught to obey international law, I think one is, first of all, can they be? They lack human judgment in certain factors. And I think that I'm not a roboticist, but from what I hear from roboticists, that there's some serious challenges to that. But even if they were taught to obey international law, there are still other factors to deal with. One is the lack of accountability. If there are gaps in the compliance with international law, there's still the security risks in terms of upping the threshold to war. There remain the dignity concerns, which I know you're playing devil's advocate about, so that's we can set that aside for the moment. But one of my feelings of having dealt with a lot of different weapon systems is, of all the different weapon systems I've dealt, there's such a breadth of problems. It's not just one, main problem. It's a breadth of problems, and I feel like even if you could address one, there's still many others that will follow behind it.
Thank you very much for coming back with that different perspective. I just wanted to ask it in that other way, because sometimes we can focus just on the negative, and I think we can sometimes flatter ourselves as humans, but really the humans are behind so much of the devastation, really. My next question is in relation to AI here in Ireland and our neutrality policy. And Rosanna, in your opening statement, you mentioned about how we're already integrating data and AI here in Ireland, and just how should we move forward in terms of adapting AI into our army, taking into context our neutrality policy and your concerns around that?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's definitely a very relevant question. And if I have 1 minute left at the end, I might also compliment something on your previous question. But first on this question, I think three things are really key in this respect. First, it's doing something that then also is being stated that will be done. So if there are principles being established, for example, what I already mentioned on a national level, and increasingly states are moving towards establishing some sort of AI-specific AI policy, namely, for example, the Italian defense has just released their AI strategy for defense. So I think this is always a starting point, because if we start with governance, or if governance, so to say, defines then the different choices and the different options or permissible uses, for example, not permissible uses, and under which circumstances, and so on. I think this is always a useful starting point. Of course, not always easy to do, given the permissible uses, for example, not permissible uses, and under which circumstances, and so on. I think this is always a useful starting point. Of course, not always easy to do, given the range of actors that are, or actors and also different interests that are at stake at national level when it comes to determining such governance principles. But this is something very important. I think that then also this is followed through, and this can, for example, if there are ethical principles established, this can be, for example, through ethics committees, ethical impact committees, that then can be consulted, so to say, for specific uses, for example, of AI systems, and be consulted on the different implications. Of course, also with various degrees, so to say, of impact or autonomy about what then the outcome is of these decisions or processes that they would assess. Second, I think what is crucial also is capacity building amongst staff. So this is, I think, also something that has been already considered in various policy documents that I've read in preparation of this committee, and this is something that I think is absolutely critical, so that the ethical consequences, first of all, of the use of this technology and the potential risks are being so to say, outlined clearly to the people that would then use them, and even also those that are not using them. I think this is really critical, but then also looking at more long-term implications and consequences, but also the upskilling and the reskilling of personnel with regard to the new technologies, but also the links not only to AI. We speak about AI a lot, but there's, again, also different data systems, also the cyber digital environment that is really important when you look at AI technology. And I think the third element that I would just mention is again the principle about meaningful human control, and what does this mean really in the context of integrating AI in national contexts. So really ensuring that those people that use the technology that also are ultimately being held accountable, and that there's no accountability gap that is being produced. And all of this, I think, for example, is being already integrated if there is a national strategy, or at least principles for the governance of the use of this technology. Then this is already, I think, a kind of an important base for a national level to then move forward. And just what I wanted to, maybe, if I may compliment, just one minute, I think with the one thing when you look at autonomous weapons that also emerged clearly about in the research that I've been conducting in the Italian Defense Forces is the concept of the moral distancing of something that is delegated to the machines. And if such, so to say, line of argumentation is going to be more and more acceptable, then I think this is not only related to defense. This can be to any use of AI in any sector. But if this principle would be more accepted, that machines are taking decisions, and I think we will be living in a very different world that we do today. So I think also from the outset, I think this is a very important principle, that humans take decisions and humans are being responsible for that I would just consider as a very important principle that should be maintained. Yeah.